Elderly couple rescues broken dog from highway. Then the vet reveals the shocking truth. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Route 27 as John and Martha drove home from their weekly visit to the farmer's market in Ocala, Florida. John, a retired schoolteacher with a neatly trimmed white beard, hummed along to a classic country tune on the radio, while Martha, his wife of 40 years, admired the vibrant sunflowers she'd purchased. Their peaceful drive was shattered when a flash of brown fur caught Martha's eye. "John, slow down," she exclaimed, pointing towards a figure lying motionless in the middle of the road. As they cautiously approached, the sight that met their eyes was heartbreaking. A medium-sized dog, its coat matted with blood and dirt, lay sprawled on the asphalt. Cars whizzed by, oblivious to the injured animal. John pulled over onto the shoulder, his heart pounding. "Poor creature," Martha whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. They approached the dog slowly, unsure if it was still alive. The dog's chest heaved shallowly, and a low whimper escaped its lips. John knelt beside it, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the damage. "Looks like it's been hit by a car," he said grimly. "Broken legs, possible internal injuries. Poor thing." The dog, a mixed breed with soulful brown eyes, wore a tattered collar but no tags. A heavy chain dangled from its neck, suggesting it had been tied up somewhere and possibly escaped. "Someone must be missing her," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "We can't just leave her here." John, a practical man, hesitated. They weren't young anymore, and the responsibility of caring for an injured animal seemed daunting. But as he looked into the dog's pleading eyes, he knew they couldn't turn away. "All right, Martha," he sighed. "Let's get her into the car." Gently, they lifted the dog into the back of their aging Ford pickup. The dog whimpered softly, its body trembling with pain. Martha cradled its head in her lap, murmuring soothing words. There, sweetheart," she crooned. "You're safe now." John drove carefully, mindful of their fragile cargo. They headed towards Ocala Animal Hospital, the closest veterinary clinic they could think of. As they drove, they discussed what to do. "John, we can't just leave her at the shelter," Martha said, her voice filled with worry. "She's in such bad shape. Who knows what will happen to her?" John shared her concern, but the reality of their situation weighed heavily on him. "Martha, we're retired. We live on a fixed income. We can barely afford our own medical bills, let alone expensive vet care for a dog." Martha knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning the dog was unbearable. "Maybe they have payment plans," she suggested hopefully. "Or maybe there's a rescue organization that can help." When they arrived at the animal hospital, the veterinarian, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Ramirez, examined the dog. Her prognosis was grim. She has multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding, and severe dehydration, Dr. Ramirez explained. "She'll need surgery, and even then, there's no guarantee she'll make a full recovery." John and Martha exchanged a worried glance. Dr. Ramirez outlined the treatment plan, which included x-rays, surgery, medication, and weeks of rehabilitation. The estimated cost was staggering. John swallowed hard. We can't afford that," he admitted. Dr. Ramirez nodded understandingly. "I know this is a difficult situation," she said. "If you can't afford the treatment, we can humanely euthanize her. It might be the kindest option." Martha felt tears welling up in her eyes. She looked at the dog, its tail giving a weak thump against the examination table. "No," she said firmly. "We can't give up on her. We'll find a way." John, seeing the determination in his wife's eyes, knew there was no arguing. He took a deep breath. "Dr. Ramirez," he said, "we'll take her home. Can you give us some basic instructions on how to care for her?" Dr. Ramirez, touched by their compassion, agreed. She provided them with antibiotics, pain medication, and detailed instructions on wound care and feeding. "She'll need a lot of rest and TLC," she emphasized. "And please bring her back for a checkup in a week, even if she seems to be improving." As they drove home with the dog nestled in a makeshift bed in the back of the truck, John and Martha felt a mix of apprehension and determination. They had no idea how they were going to manage, but they were committed to giving this injured creature a chance at life. Back at their cozy ranch house on the outskirts of Ocala, John and Martha carefully carried the dog inside. They settled her in a quiet corner of their living room, creating a makeshift bed with blankets and pillows. The dog, exhausted and in pain, lay still, her breathing shallow. "What are we going to call her?" Martha asked, stroking the dog's soft fur. John smiled. "Well, she's certainly a little cutie, isn't she?" And so the name stuck. Little Cutie, or LC for short, became the newest member of their household. The first few days were challenging. LC was weak and in pain, requiring constant care. Martha, with her nurturing instincts, took the lead. She cleaned and dressed LC's wounds, coaxed her to eat small amounts of boiled chicken and rice, and administered the medication Dr. Ramirez had prescribed. John, ever the handyman, fashioned a splint for LC's broken leg using cardboard and duct tape. They took turns sleeping on the couch next to LC's bed, waking up every few hours to check on her and offer her water. They worried about her constantly. Would she make it through the night? Would the antibiotics be enough to fight off infection? Would her leg heal properly? Despite their anxieties, they found themselves growing increasingly attached to the gentle creature. LC, in turn, seemed to sense their kindness and responded with quiet gratitude. She would lick their hands when they changed her bandages, and her tail would thump weakly against the floor when they spoke to her. One evening, as Martha sat beside LC's bed, reading aloud from her favorite book of poetry, she noticed something remarkable. LC's tail, which had been still for days, gave a tentative wag. A small wag, but a wag nonetheless. Martha's heart swelled with joy. "John, look!" she exclaimed. "She's wagging her tail." John hurried over, and they both watched in delight as LC's tail wagged a little more vigorously. It was a small victory, a sign that LC was fighting to survive, and it filled them with hope. The wagging tail marked a turning point in LC's recovery. Her appetite gradually returned, and she began to show more interest in her surroundings. She would lift her head to watch the squirrels scampering in the oak tree outside the window, and she would nuzzle Martha's hand when she came to change her bandages. John and Martha were amazed by LC's resilience. Despite the pain she must have been enduring, she never snapped or growled. She took her medicine without complaint, even though it tasted bitter. She seemed to understand that they were trying to help her. One sunny afternoon, John decided to take LC outside for some fresh air. He carefully carried her into the backyard and placed her gently on the soft grass. LC sniffed the air with interest, her tail giving a happy wag. She looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings, her eyes wide with curiosity. John sat beside her, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face. He watched as LC attempted to stand, her injured leg wobbling. She took a few tentative steps, then collapsed back onto the grass with a whimper. John's heart ached for her, but he knew she needed to try. "Come on, LC," he encouraged gently. "You can do it." With John's support, LC slowly regained her footing. She took a few more steps, then a few more. Soon, she was hobbling around the yard, sniffing at the flowers and chasing butterflies. John beamed with pride. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to him. That night, however, LC's progress seemed to take a step back. She whimpered and cried in her sleep, her body trembling. Martha woke up and rushed to her side, stroking her fur and whispering soothing words. "It's all right, LC," she murmured. "You're safe now." John woke up to the sound of LC's cries. He joined Martha on the floor beside LC's bed, his heart heavy with worry. "Do you think she's in pain?" he whispered. Martha shook her head. "I don't think so. I think she's having nightmares. Maybe she's remembering what happened to her." The thought of LC's past brought tears to their eyes. They couldn't imagine who would abandon such a sweet and gentle creature. They vowed to give her the loving home she deserved. As the days turned into weeks, LC continued to improve. Her leg healed, though she was left with a slight limp. Her wounds closed, leaving only faint scars as reminders of her ordeal. She gained weight, her coat becoming glossy and soft. But the most significant change was in her demeanor. The fear and anxiety that had haunted her eyes in the early days gradually faded, replaced by a growing sense of trust and affection. She followed John and Martha everywhere, her tail wagging constantly. She would sit at their feet while they ate dinner, her big brown eyes pleading for scraps. She would curl up on the couch beside them while they watched television, her head resting on their laps. John and Martha, in turn, found their hearts opening wider than they ever thought possible. They had never owned a pet before, content with their quiet life together. But Elsie had brought a new dimension of joy and companionship into their home. They loved her unconditional love, her playful spirit, and her gentle nature. They established a routine that revolved around Elsie's needs. Every morning, John took her for a walk around the neighborhood, their pace slow and steady to accommodate her limp. Martha spent her afternoons brushing Elsie's fur, talking to her in a soft, soothing voice. In the evenings, they would all curl up on the couch together, Elsie nestled between them, content and secure. Elsie's presence brought a new rhythm to their lives, a sense of purpose and connection they hadn't realized they were missing. They found themselves laughing more often, their days filled with simple pleasures, a walk in the sunshine, a game of fetch in the backyard, a cuddle on the couch. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, John turned to Martha, his eyes filled with love. "Martha," he said, "I can't imagine our lives without her now." Martha smiled, her hand resting on Elsie's head. "Me neither, John," she replied. "She's family." Life with Elsie wasn't without its challenges. John and Martha, accustomed to a quiet and predictable routine, had to adjust to the demands of a lively and sometimes mischievous dog. Elsie, despite her gentle nature, had a penchant for digging in the flower beds, chasing squirrels up trees, and occasionally chewing on things she shouldn't. One morning, Martha woke up to find her prized rose bushes uprooted and a trail of dirt leading to a very proud-looking Elsie, who was wagging her tail furiously. Martha, initially dismayed, couldn't help but laugh at the sight. "Elsie, you rascal!" she exclaimed. "What am I going to do with you?" John, ever the pragmatist, suggested building a small fence around the flower beds. "It'll keep Elsie out," he said, "and it'll give the roses a chance to recover." Another challenge was Elsie's separation anxiety. Whenever John and Martha left the house, even for a short errand, Elsie would become agitated, pacing and whining. They tried leaving her with a chew toy or turning on the radio, but nothing seemed to soothe her distress. One day, their neighbor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Henderson, noticed Elsie's anxious behavior. "She misses you terribly when you're gone," Mrs. Henderson observed. "Have you considered doggy daycare?" John and Martha had never heard of doggy daycare, but Mrs. Henderson explained that it was a place where dogs could socialize and play while their owners were away. Intrigued, they decided to give it a try. They enrolled Elsie in a nearby doggy daycare, and to their relief, she thrived. She loved playing with the other dogs, and the staff adored her gentle nature. When John and Martha picked her up at the end of the day, she was tired but happy, her tail wagging excitedly. Doggy daycare not only solved Elsie's separation anxiety but also introduced John and Martha to a new community of dog lovers. They started chatting with other dog owners at the daycare, sharing stories and advice. They even made a few new friends, people they might never have met otherwise. With Elsie settled and happy, John and Martha found themselves embracing a more active lifestyle. Their daily walks with Elsie became longer and more adventurous. They explored the network of trails in the nearby state park, marveling at the beauty of the Florida wilderness. They discovered hidden corners of their own neighborhood, places they had never noticed before. Elsie, with her boundless energy and enthusiasm, seemed to rejuvenate them. They felt younger, more vibrant, more connected to the world around them. Their walks became a time for reflection and conversation, a chance to appreciate the simple pleasures of nature and companionship. One day, while walking along a trail by the Ocala River, they encountered a group of birdwatchers. Elsie, intrigued by the colorful birds flitting among the trees, sat quietly at their feet, her tail wagging gently. The birdwatchers, charmed by her gentle demeanor, struck up a conversation with John and Martha. They learned about the different species of birds that inhabited the area, their migration patterns, and their unique songs. John and Martha, who had never paid much attention to birds before, found themselves fascinated. They started noticing the birds in their own backyard, identifying their calls and observing their behavior. This newfound interest in nature led them to join the local Audubon Society, where they attended lectures and participated in birdwatching expeditions. They even started volunteering at a nearby wildlife rehabilitation center, helping to care for injured birds and animals. Elsie, their constant companion, accompanied them on many of these adventures. She seemed to enjoy the outings as much as they did, her tail wagging excitedly as they explored new places and met new people. Through Elsie, John and Martha had not only found a beloved pet, but also a renewed sense of purpose and connection to the world around them. Their lives, once quiet and predictable, were now filled with adventure, learning, and the joy of giving back to their community. One warm afternoon, John decided to take Elsie for a drive. He hadn't been back to the stretch of Route 27 where they had found her, and he felt a strange pull to revisit the place. Perhaps it was a need for closure, a desire to see how far Elsie had come since that fateful day. As they approached the spot, a wave of sadness washed over John. He remembered the sight of Elsie lying broken and helpless in the middle of the road, the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of her fate. He glanced at Elsie, who was sitting beside him in the passenger seat, her head out the window, her tongue lolling happily in the breeze. She seemed oblivious to the significance of the location. John pulled over onto the shoulder and let Elsie out of the truck. She sniffed the ground excitedly, exploring the grassy verge with her usual enthusiasm. Then, she did something unexpected. She walked towards the middle of the road, stopping at the exact spot where John and Martha had found her. She stood there for a moment, her head lowered, as if paying homage to her past. John watched, his heart aching with a mixture of sadness and pride. He knew that Elsie would never forget the trauma she had endured, but he also knew that she had come so far. She had overcome her injuries, her fear, her loneliness. She had found a loving home, a family who cherished her. Elsie turned and looked at John, her tail giving a tentative wag. It was as if she was saying, "I remember, but I'm not afraid anymore." John smiled, tears welling up in his eyes. He walked over to Elsie and knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her neck. "You're a survivor, Elsie," he whispered. "You're a miracle." They stayed there for a while, John and Elsie, connected by an invisible thread of shared experience and unconditional love. The traffic whizzed by, oblivious to the profound moment of healing taking place on the side of the road. The visit to Route 27 seemed to bring a sense of peace to both John and Elsie. It was as if they had confronted a ghost and emerged stronger. Elsie, in particular, seemed to blossom in the weeks that followed. Her playful spirit returned with a vengeance, and she filled their days with laughter and joy. One evening, as John and Martha were preparing dinner, they heard a commotion coming from the backyard. They rushed outside to find Elsie barking excitedly at a small, brown bird that had fallen out of its nest. The bird, clearly injured, was flapping its wings frantically, unable to fly. Elsie, instead of chasing the bird as they might have expected, was nudging it gently with her nose, as if trying to help. John and Martha, touched by her compassion, carefully scooped up the bird and brought it inside. They examined the bird, discovering a broken wing. Remembering their experience with Elsie, they decided to try to nurse it back to health themselves. They fashioned a makeshift splint for the wing, using a toothpick and some tape, and placed the bird in a small box lined with soft cloths. They named the bird Hope, and they took turns feeding it a mixture of mashed-up seeds and water. Elsie, fascinated by the tiny creature, would sit beside the box for hours, watching Hope with intense curiosity. Over the next few weeks, John and Martha, with Elsie as their attentive assistant, nurtured Hope back to health. They cleaned its wounds, fed it regularly, and provided it with a safe and comfortable environment. Slowly but surely, Hope's wing healed, and it began to regain its strength. One sunny morning, they took Hope outside and released it into the backyard. They watched with joy as the bird took flight, soaring into the blue sky. Elsie barked happily, her tail wagging furiously, as if celebrating Hope's newfound freedom. The experience with Hope deepened John and Martha's appreciation for Elsie's gentle nature and her capacity for empathy. They realized that Elsie, despite her own traumatic past, had retained a deep sense of compassion for other creatures in need. She had, in a way, repaid their kindness by showing them the true meaning of compassion and resilience. Life with Elsie continued to be a source of joy and fulfillment for John and Martha. They celebrated her first Gotcha Day, the anniversary of the day they found her on Route 27, with a special dinner of steak for them and a juicy bone for Elsie. They invited Mrs. Henderson and a few other friends they had made through the doggy daycare and the Audubon Society. Elsie, the guest of honor, basked in the attention, her tail wagging non-stop. She had become a beloved member of their community, known for her gentle nature and her remarkable story of resilience. As the years passed, Elsie, like John and Martha, began to show her age. Her walks became shorter, her naps longer. Her once glossy coat turned gray around the muzzle. But her spirit remained as bright as ever, her love for John and Martha unwavering. One day, Elsie's health took a sudden turn for the worse. She became lethargic, refusing to eat, her once vibrant eyes clouded with pain. John and Martha, their hearts heavy with dread, rushed her to the vet. Dr. Ramirez, who had treated Elsie on that first fateful day, examined her gently. She explained that Elsie's age and past injuries had taken their toll. Her kidneys were failing, and there was little they could do. John and Martha, devastated, made the difficult decision to let Elsie go peacefully. They held her close as Dr. Ramirez administered the final injection, their tears falling onto her soft fur. Elsie's passing left a void in their lives that could never be filled. They mourned her deeply, their home feeling empty without her presence. But they also cherished the memories of the years they had shared, the joy she had brought into their lives, the lessons she had taught them about love, compassion, and resilience. One evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, John turned to Martha, his eyes filled with tears. "I miss her so much, Martha," he said. Martha reached for his hand, her voice soft with emotion. "I know, John," she replied, "but we were so lucky to have her in our lives. She changed us, John. She made us better people." John nodded, remembering the day they had found Elsie on Route 27, broken and abandoned. He thought of the journey they had taken together, the challenges they had overcome, the love they had shared. And he knew that Elsie, their little cutie, had given them a gift far greater than they could ever have imagined. She had shown them the transformative power of love, the resilience of the spirit, and the beauty of a life lived in gratitude. And in their hearts, she would live on forever.